for at least 10 years, we have been waiting patiently for technology to transform government. From Clay Shirky on the TED stage, to Scott Heiferman, co-founder of Meetup at the Berkman Center, to every single researcher or Silicon Valley utopian who dreamed of a better future powered by tech. We have all actually believed in this extraordinary ability that technology has for enabling us to collaborate across time and space, and saw that as a sign of the demise of representative democracy and the emergence of more participatory, open, and crowdsourced institutions. And yet, 10 years later, nothing has really changed. You see, technology will not and it cannot change the game unless it is used by the powerless, not the powerful. And right now, technology is actually being deployed more often than not by a handful of companies and established institutions to actually shape people's behavior, especially as consumers, a whole lot more than people are using technology to reshape the world. So why is that? Well, I think that it's because our premises about the very nature of representation are wrong. About 6 months ago, I spoke at TED Global in my hometown of Rio about a movement that I co-founded in the city of Rio. It's called Meu Rio. It's a membership-driven movement. It has now over 200,000 registered members in the city of Rio. And it's actually been able to harness enough power to challenge some decisions that were being made in the city without any input from people. And at some point in that TED Talk, I say that the internet, by allowing us to make decisions together without having to be in the same room at the same time, would actually make representative democracy obsolete. And it's funny because after the video went online and 500,000 people saw it in 1 week, I started asking myself whether I had said something that I shouldn't have, and I think that actually happened in this particular case. Because, see, representation is not just a logistical answer to a logistical challenge. It is not the natural evolution of democracy adapted to scale. We don't need representatives just because we cannot actually make decisions by ourselves. Representation is a system of government that has been able to keep a handful of elites in power, and it could be right-wing elites or left-wing elites, while guaranteeing some sort of peaceful transition amongst them, but not really working for us as people. So, should we then conclude that democracy itself is a fallacy? Just, a beautiful narrative used to keep people's voices down and, from time to time, justify wars in faraway places? I don't think so, because criticizing the institutions of democracy, and specifically representative, competitive democracy, is not the same as criticizing the ideals of a democratic society. And in fact, I think that if we do not rebel against these institutions that claim to have some sort of totalitarian ownership over the commons and over us, we will no longer be able to call ourselves true Democrats. If we continue to only dispute the outcome, the results of decisions that were being made through a system that is exclusionary at its very roots, instead of actually thinking about how to redesign the entire system, we will have settled for very little. And I think that we are capable of more than that. But that's not what we're doing. In fact, most digitally savvy, communications-driven movements that have emerged in the 21st century and are using digital petitions and other tools to harness people's power and people's voices are actually, in a way, replicating the same power structures that we already live in, by essentially using these massive but passive acts of mobilization to create gigantic mailing lists that are centrally controlled by a handful of leaders. And I should know, because that's exactly what I did with Meu Rio, at least in the beginning. But then our community started to grow, and we realized that we were there to change the world, not to turn ourselves into the same elite leaders that have always kept power for themselves and themselves alone. So we started to pivot our model to actually work with communities and give them resources and knowledge and training and the information they need to actually have power with each other and over other institutions and make the change that they want to see in the world. But that's not enough. Because, see, we are just a tiny drop in a vast ocean of activists, political organizers, artists, researchers, collaborative economy evangelists, and so on and so on. And we all actually need to reclaim justice and equity and sustainability as fundamental values of our work. We cannot keep thinking that our work is neutral. It isn't. We are actually changing the world every day as we do our work. And we need to put those values at the core of what we do. Because what we need here is not just new tools. It's a new constitutional moment. We actually need to think about the work that we do and the world that we want to live in. Right now, I think we live in a world of fear. I'm at that age where all of my friends are starting to have kids. And when I look into the eyes of new parents, all I see is fear. If they're really rich, they're afraid their kid might be robbed or kidnapped or killed. And they're trying to live in these sort of gated communities and manicure lives and trying to keep themselves at bay from the actual real world. So they're afraid every day. If they're middle class, they're afraid they might lose their job and their income. And if you live in a place where the commons are not important, where there is no safety net to catch you if you fall, losing your income doesn't just mean losing access to consumption. It doesn't mean just not buying the new iPhone or something. It actually means losing access to citizenship. It means that your kids may not have an education. It means that your loved ones may not have health care. And if they're poor, they're just afraid that they may not survive. Not just because they don't have resources, but because they're constantly being the victims of this gigantic and ever-increasing police apparatus that was built to preserve a lot of things, but certainly not their lives. We also live in a world that is just not viable anymore, and we kind of all know this. We all know that the sustainability crisis is here, and it's present. It's not something in the future, but I think we have also understood that this crisis does not affect all of us in the same way. For a long time, that was kind of the promise of the problem, right? Climate change and sustainability were, in a way, a good problem, because for the first time, humanity would have to come together if we were to solve this problem. It was something that was going to affect all of us equally. But I think we've realized that the way climate change actually works is very different from that. It affects the poor and the masses in a way that it does not affect the elites. It doesn't mean that the elites are not affected at all, but it means they have a lot more means to cope. Which is why climate change and sustainability also require decision-making processes to deal with them that are driven by the people, who are actually affected by them. I think we are afraid because deep inside we know that our democratic institutions are failing and we have absolutely nothing to replace them with. But there's good news in this whole world of technology, and I think that the best news is that what technology has been really good at is actually making it really hard for institutions that need us to work and make us work to capture all of the value of the work we produce. So if you take Facebook, for instance, the only real useful thing you can do for Facebook as a worker of Facebook, which we all are, is to give away your data and click on ads and buy things, right? Like that's what makes them money. But in order for them to have you do all of these things, they also need to enable you and allow you to do all sorts of other things that they cannot capture. They cannot add and attach value to it immediately, like advocacy, for instance, organizing, or just simply talking to your loved ones and family and friends in a non-consumerist way. The same is true of political organizing and political campaigning and how that has evolved. If you look at first Howard Dean in 2004 and then Obama, very famously, in 2008, you will see that political campaigning has changed dramatically. It is no longer driven only by broadcast messaging, but also and fundamentally by an army of volunteers, of passionate people that were out in the streets, getting people out to vote and actually convincing them to operate the change they wanted to see in the world. And when those people did that, when they worked for Obama, because that's what they did, they were not just getting votes for him, they were also meeting each other, making meaningful connections, and becoming aware of their own power. And that was the part that cannot be captured. That was an unintended consequence. That was never what that system was designed for. And the biggest proof is that after Obama actually took office, he never redeployed that energy. He never tried to reignite that community, because that's not what he wanted. He just wanted to get into office. So I think the real interesting question for all of us is, how do we organize that part that cannot be captured? How do we use the existing infrastructure that is being deployed under our feet that gives us extraordinary possibility, and how do we work at the margins? How do we actually organize that part that no institution will be able to control to empower ourselves to create the change that we want to see in the world? I don't think it will be by isolating the individual. You know, this idea of personal democracy, that you will make demands on your government as a person, and that demand should be heard because government is a service, and it should service you as a consumer. I don't think that works. I think that idea is dead. And it's dead because it just reinforces this pattern by which we essentially live in our own little bubble. And technology, again, has actually been really good at that too, right? Like, we are living in algorithms that essentially tell us what we want to hear. We only see Facebook posts on our timeline that are coming from people that we usually interact with. When we do a Google search, we're essentially getting results that reinforce our previous searches. When we look for a movie on Netflix, they're telling us which movies we should love. And when we look for apps on the App Store, they're telling us which iPhone and Apple-approved apps we should have. But in order to use technology to transform politics, we need to do the exact opposite. We need to use tech to navigate conflict. And we need to do this as a community, not as individuals. Because as a community, we will have to understand our differences, and we will have to actually filter out the narrow-mindedness, the self-interests that for too long have equated participation with chaos and fragmentation. And after we do that, I don't actually know what institutions we should have. But that's okay, because see, just because we don't have the full answers, it doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it. Actually, not having the answers puts us in the position to be explorers. Just because we don't know the end of the road, it shouldn't mean that we shouldn't embark in the journey. We can do this. This is the challenge of our time. Democracy doesn't need an upgrade. It needs a reboot. And it's up to us, not software, to make that change happen. Thank you.